into Iraq and Afghanistan for $1 trillion, or $1 trillion tax deal at Christmas time. You cut taxes for the wealthy and cut jobs for workers. Workers should not and must not be the scapegoat for this. Again, the beauty here in Madison is that at least in places like Libya, they don't have the right to fight for the right. In America, we do. We exercise that right to fight for the right.
Well, Reverend Jackson, I thank you for being with us. We're going to be going to Ohio in a minute, where you're headed to today. But I wanted to go to Peter Rickman, an activist in the Teaching Assistants Association at University of Wisconsin-Madison. You've been at the Capitol building for more than a week. Can you describe the scene there and exactly what you're demanding? The polls are indicating that Governor Walker is losing support by the day in the stance that he has taken.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Amy. Well, we've been behind the Capitol here for a week because, we're standing up for, as Reverend Jackson said, the basic fundamental human right to form and join unions. We're standing up to make sure that worker rights are protected, and we're standing up to make sure that democracy in our state is protected, too. The focus here is really on I think a lot of people have concentrated on the fact that we've engaged in an unprecedented occupation of the state capitol building, but it's because all of us, students and workers are united around these just core fundamental principles that are what animate the difference between, a Libya or an Egypt of a few weeks ago and the United States, where we're supposed to have democracy and civil rights. This is who we are. This is what we're fighting for.
I'm looking at a new labor poll, Peter. According to a new poll taken by the Democratic firm Greenberg, Quinlan, Rossner, sponsored by the AFL-CIO Change to Win and NEA, if state workers agree to pay more for health care and retirement, as the governor's asked, do you think they should also have their collective bargaining rights taken away? Only 21% of respondents said yes. 74% said no. Walker's favorability ratings are underwater in the poll, with 49% saying they have an unfavorable impression of the governor. What is going to happen today? Today is a serious showdown. Yesterday, we talked with Malon Mitchell. He's head of the Firemen's Association, the union. And I know he and about 50 other firemen slept in the Capitol building. Last night, they brought their kids' teddy bears there. He slept right under the famous Robert La Follette statue that's there. And they're there in case the governor attempts to remove people from the Capitol building today?
Yeah, we've started to see an even larger influx of late of people like Malin and the firefighters and the United Steelworkers and a host of other people who are engaged in this struggle throughout the rest of the day. And they're saying that holding the Capitol with us overnight is an important part of continuing the fight for worker rights and democracy. We've had people from all walks of life there throughout. This isn't just students or in our case, graduate assistants occupying the Capitol. But I think it's becoming more and more high profile as the pressure ramps up as we approach some legislative action on this. There's pressure for the police who've actually been our allies in this. There's pressure on them to have the occupation removed because it is just dramatizing the struggle that we have. There's more workers than non-workers in our country and in our state. So I'm not surprised to see the numbers move like this. People understand that this is a fundamental attack on basic worker rights. It's a fundamental attack on the things that make it possible for economic justice. So people like Malin, the firefighters, steel workers, and other folks, nurses, home care workers who are joining us are doing this because this is a struggle for all working folks.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Peter Rickman, for joining us. Peter Rickman of the Teaching Assistants Association at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As we turn now to Ohio, we go directly to Columbus to Donald Conley, Operations Director for Ohio Civil Service Association, a union representing 34,000 of the state's employees. Welcome to Democracy Now! Tell us what your plans are for today. How many people do you expect out? And explain what Governor Kasich has introduced.
Okay. First, we expect at least 10,000 people down at the State House today. Each time we have an event, the crowds swell, get larger. 10,000 is a minimum. I wouldn't be surprised to see twice that many. A lot of folks are coming from all over the state, and in spite of bad weather, they're all saying they will show up. Senate Bill 5 is the reason they're demonstrating, and Senate Bill 5 has been introduced to do, according to public statements, to do several things, most of which don't need to be done. The governor, just heard on your segment before I came on the air, the governor is talking about the right to strike. He wants to take that away. Well, since we've had collective bargaining in Ohio, our people haven't gone on strike, period, not once. So what right is he looking to enforce? That's a false, it's a straw man, it's not real. He says that he wants the fact-finding to go away, either disappear or make that a public finding. That's how negotiations, impasses are resolved, through fact-finding. And the fact is that every time we've gone to fact-finding, the day after the fact-finder's report is in, it's been in all the newspapers. So those things don't need legislation to happen. They've been happening all along. Our security forces, like the corrections officers who work in the prisons, never had the right to strike to begin with. So the real question is, what are they really after? And the only real change, I mean, our people haven't had a raise in 5 years. We've voluntarily taken pay cuts for the last 2 years. The only real change they seem to be after, if you read the bill, which is 500 pages long, is that they want to take away collective bargaining rights for public employees. That's a power play. It's an attack on the middle class and basic human rights for people who work for the government agencies, whether it's state, county, or municipal government entities. There's no two ways about it. What they're saying in the media is not what they're actually going for.
I mean, it's very interesting when you talk about the media. Clearly, Governor Walker's poll ratings are going down as the workers say they're willing to go with basically all of the actual financial cuts that he's talking about, whether to do with pension or health insurance. But they're not willing to give up their collective bargaining rights, which means this is not the budget issue in Wisconsin that Governor Walker says it is. Do you feel like Governor Kasich is following the same playbook there?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. It's a nationwide trend. When the sponsor of this particular bill, Shannon Jones, gave testimony to the Senate in Ohio, she was asked how much money. You know, they've been talking about the budget constantly. They use the budget. And she was asked how much money would this legislation save. She said she didn't know. They asked her, how much will it save any money? She said she didn't know. And then they asked her, well, why are you introducing this if it's not saving money? And she got kind of nervous and told the truth. She said, it's my philosophy. We think that public employees should not have the rights that they have now. And that's what it really boils down to. You know, there's an old saying in politics, never let a good crisis go to waste. We have a budget deficit looming, and they're using that crisis as an excuse to go after the rights of public employees, part of the overall attack on the middle class.
Don O'Connelly, I want to thank you for being with us, Operations Director for Ohio Civil Service Association. The union represents 34,000 state employees in Ohio. As we turn now to Matt Taibbi, but before I do, let me read a sentence from a recent paper by Dean Baker, who concludes most of the pension shortfall using the current methodology is attributable to the plunge in the stock market in the years 2007 to 2009. If pension funds had earned returns just equal to the interest rate on 30-year Treasury bonds in the 3 years since 2007, their assets would be more than $850 billion greater than they are today. And this, he quotes David K. Johnson of Tax.com. The average Wisconsin pension is $24,500 a year, which is hardly lavish. But what is stunning is that 15% of the money contributed to the fund each year is going to Wall Street in fees. Which is why we now ask the question, why isn't Wall Street in jail? Actually, that's the title of reporter Matt Taibbi's new article for Rolling Stone magazine. In the piece, Matt writes, quote, "Nobody goes to jail. This is the mantra of the financial crisis era, one that saw virtually every major bank and financial company on Wall Street embroiled in obscene criminal scandals that impoverished millions and collectively destroyed hundreds of billions. In fact, trillions of dollars of the world's wealth." Well, I interviewed Matt Taibbi on Sunday about his report. Now I want to play an excerpt of our discussion. We're seeing these mass protests in Madison, Wisconsin, and there's other protests that are happening. We see the working poor, the middle class, under tremendous stress, and yet they're the ones who are being hit hardest, not Wall Street. Explain what has happened. Why isn't Wall Street in jail?
Well, it's an incredible story. I mean, just to back up, provide some context, I think, for this Wisconsin thing, and especially for the Ohio thing, given what their governor used to do for a living.
Explain.
Well, he was an employee for Lehman Brothers, and he was...
This is Governor Kasich.
Governor Kasich, yeah, and he was intimately involved with getting the state of Ohio's pension fund to invest in Lehman Brothers and buy mortgage-backed securities, and of course they lost all that money. And this broadly was really what the mortgage bubble and the financial crisis was all about. It was essentially a gigantic criminal fraud scheme where all the banks were taking mismarked mortgage-backed securities, very, very dangerous, toxic subprime loans. They were chopping them up and then packaging them as AAA-rated investments and then selling them to state pension funds, to insurance companies, to Chinese banks and Dutch banks and Icelandic banks. And, of course, these things were blowing up, and all those funds were going broke. But what they're doing now is they're blaming the people who are collecting these pensions. They're blaming the workers, they're blaming the firemen, they're blaming the policemen, whereas in reality they were actually the victims of this fraud scheme. And the only reason that people aren't angrier about this, I think, is because they don't really understand what happened. If these were car companies that had sold $1 trillion worth of defective cars to the citizens of the United States, there'd be riots right now. But these were mortgage-backed securities. It's complicated. People don't understand it. And they're only now, I think, beginning to realize that they were defrauded. Explain what the crime is, who has profited, who should be on trial. Well, again, the broad crime in all of this was just fraud. These banks were taking, again, these subprime mortgages, and they would have these billion-dollar pools of mortgages where, in some cases, 70 or 80% of the loans were to people who had no identification or no jobs or who had put no money down into the mortgage. And then they were taking these loans and applying this phony baloney hocus-pocus math, these derivative instruments, and turning them into AAA-rated investments. And they were marketing, again, these securities to, say, state pension funds as AAA-rated investments, which means credit risk almost zero. So they took this stuff that they knew was very, very risky and very, very likely to default, and they were going to the state of Wisconsin, the state of Ohio, the state of New York, and saying, hey, this is almost as safe as, or in fact, it is as safe as United States Treasury bonds. You should buy this, and you'll earn a little bit more than you'll earn if you buy T-bills. The reality was they were just taking absolutely worthless stuff and sticking it with these people, and then fleeing the scene. This is no different than drug dealers who take a bag of oregano and sell it to you as a pound of weed. That's exactly the same scam. Talk about John Mack and Gary Aguirre. This is an amazing story just because it demonstrates how far above the law these people are. John Mack is one of the most powerful people on Wall Street. Right now, he's the chairman of the board at Morgan Stanley. He used to be their CEO. Way back in 2001, when he was sort of between jobs, he had left Morgan Stanley and was interviewing with Credit Suisse First Boston. He was involved in a case that was investigated by the SEC. A hedge fund called Pequot made a very suspicious investment into a company called Heller Capital, which was about to be acquired by General Electric. This hedge fund bought, an enormous amount of Heller stock 3 weeks before this acquisition by GE of Heller. Credit Suisse First Boston was Heller's investment banker. John Mack was interviewing for the job with Credit Suisse a few days before Pequot made its purchases. and he was in direct contact with the hedge fund guy who made those